My name is Veka Solm, and for 19 cycles I ran exposure trials in the Threshold Annex, the sealed wing of our quarantine station built for one purpose: to study the mantle without letting it leave the room. The mantle did not have a homeworld anymore. It had used up its homeworld the way a flame uses up the wood beneath it. By the time we captured a viable culture of it, drifting in the wreck of a research outpost with no crew left to explain what had happened to them, the mantle had already touched 11 species across 4 systems. 11 for 11. It bonded to a host, dismantled the host's nervous system from the inside, rebuilt the shape of whatever it had eaten, and walked away wearing the dead thing's face. We never found a defense that worked. We only found better ways to burn it before it spread. So when Command told us a human was being brought in for the next scheduled exposure series, I expected nothing unusual. We had run 43 trials on 43 different species by then, and the data sheet for each one read the same way in the end, just with different names in the host column. The human's name was Daniel Okafor. He was a contracted biologist, not a soldier, not a diplomat. The kind of quiet, competent specialist Command liked to use for first contact biology, because they asked fewer questions and signed the forms without complaint. His file was thin compared to most of our prior subjects. No combat record, no augmentation. A body that registered on our medical scans as unremarkable in every category we had thought to measure. That was, in its way, the point of the trial. We had stopped testing soldiers years ago, after the 3rd or 4th time someone in Command argued that a stronger specimen might simply resist longer before losing. We wanted an ordinary one. Okafor was as ordinary as the manifest could find. He walked into the observation corridor on his own legs, looked through the glass at the sealed exposure chamber, and asked me what the safety margin was if something went wrong. I told him the truth, because I had stopped pretending otherwise years ago. There was no safety margin. If it went wrong, the chamber would be sealed permanently, and he would not be coming out of it as himself. He nodded, like I had told him the weather forecast for the week, and said he understood, and then he asked when we wanted to start. We began the way we always began, with a contained sample, not a full host. A scraping of his blood was drawn under glass and brought into contact with a live fragment of the mantle, in an isolated dish. The 2 organisms separated from open exposure by a half-second delay valve, so that if the reaction looked wrong, we could seal it before it propagated. The reaction looked wrong from the first half-second. In every prior trial, the mantle's fragment had reached toward the host sample the way a current reaches toward a drain. Fast, certain, already beginning to unzip the donor cell's structure before contact was even complete. With Okafor's blood, the fragment reached and then it recoiled. Our instruments logged a contraction pulse we had never recorded before, the mantle's tissue drawing back from the sample like something had burned it on contact. Dr. Imra Set, our lead virologist, called it an artifact of the delivery system and asked for a clean repeat. We ran it again. The fragment reached, touched, and began to die. Not retreated, died. Its structure unwound in real time on the readout. The cellular architecture that had survived 11 species and 100 years of theoretical study coming apart in under 4 minutes, as though something in the sample itself had reached back into it and begun pulling threads. Set stood very still in front of the display for a long moment before she spoke. She said it had to be contamination in the sample chamber, a foreign agent, a sterilization residue, something in our own equipment poisoning the read. We sterilized everything and ran a 3rd trial with a fresh draw. The result did not change. By then, the room had gone quiet in the particular way our rooms went quiet when nobody wanted to be the one to say the obvious thing first. I was the one who said it. I told the team that the mantle was not failing to bond with the sample. It was being killed by it. Okafor, still watching from the corridor with the patient calm of a man observing someone else's weather, asked whether that was a problem. Warden Tolvith Yarn, who oversaw containment for the annex and rarely spoke unless containment itself was in question, told him that it depended entirely on what happened in the next phase. The next phase was full exposure, a live host, full contact, no delay valve. We had never had a reason to be afraid of that step before. Now half the room did not want to run it at all. Okafor was the one who asked us to proceed. He said, in the flat, unbothered tone he had used since walking in, that if his blood was already doing something to it in a dish, He wanted to know what it would do to the whole organism, and that he trusted us to pull him out if it went wrong. He did not say it like a man trying to prove anything. He said it like a man filling out a form he had already half finished. We sealed him into the exposure chamber with full monitoring and introduced the mantle's primary culture, the largest viable mass we kept in containment, the closest thing to its full adult form that had ever survived our handling. It did not assimilate him. It attacked him, the way a starving animal attacks the only food in the room, fast and total, flowing up his exposed forearm in under 2 seconds. Every alarm in the annex went off at once. Yarn's hand was already on the seal lever. I told him to wait. On the internal feed, Okafor did not scream and did not fall. He stood with the mantle climbing his arm and his jaw set, breathing hard through his nose, and said, evenly, that it hurt like hell and to keep watching. We kept watching. The readouts told the rest of it before our eyes caught up. The mantle, fully committed, fully inside him, met something it had never met in 11 prior hosts. A defense network that did not wait to be consumed. Okafor's own biology rose to meet it the instant it crossed his skin, flooding the contact zone, hunting the organism's structure cell by cell, with a speed and a coordination that looked, on our instruments, less like a passive immune response, and more like a war fought by a species that had been fighting wars like it for longer than the mantle had existed. It took 6 minutes. By the end of it, the mass that had climbed his arm was a thin, dead residue, flaking away from his skin in pieces too small and too still to register as anything that had ever been alive. Okafor was sitting on the floor of the chamber, with his back against the wall, breathing hard, holding the spot on his forearm where it had gone in, looking at it the way a man looks at a bruise he expects to feel tomorrow. 2 of the junior technicians had to be told twice to release the seal before their hands would move. Set did not speak for a long time after the chamber cleared. She stood in front of the dead structure on the display, turning the readout over and over with her eyes, the way someone rereads a sentence they do not believe the first time. When she finally spoke, it was to say that in 19 cycles of cataloging what the mantle could do to a body, we had never once built a file on what a body could do to the mantle. We had asked every question about the predator and none about the prey, because in 11 prior trials, there had never been a prey at all, only hosts, and then nothing. I filed the report myself that night, and I rewrote the quarantine protocol with my own hands. For 19 cycles, the threshold annex existed to keep the galaxy safe from whatever the mantle touched next. I closed the file with a different line, the only one I could write that was honest. We had not been quarantining humans from the mantle. We had been quarantining the last of the mantle from them, and we simply hadn't known it yet. Okafor asked to see the final readout before he left the annex. He looked at the dead organism's structure on the screen for a moment, then asked if we needed anything else from him for the file. I told him no. I told him we had everything we needed. He said that was good, because his arm still hurt, and he'd like to go get it looked at by someone who used painkillers instead of monitoring screens. Then he signed the last form, the same way he'd signed all the others, and walked out through the sealed corridor on his own legs, the only host in the annex's history who ever did.